Okay, we're live, Merc. How you doing, man?
All right, a little tired, a little stressed, but overall, all right. How you doing?
Good. If I could only get this weird sound out of my headphones, I'd be happy. Oh, that it's gone now. Cool. Um, we talked on the phone last night for 3.5 hours. I think two of which was about determinism and free will.
Yep.
That was one of the most interesting conversations I've ever had. One of the things that we did that I really appreciated is I took the free will side for the first chunk of the debate, and then we switched, and you took the free will side, and it reminded me of the concept of steel manning,
hmm
and I found it to be an incredibly useful exercise.
Yeah, it was. Although it was slightly different for you and me because for you, the reason we started out that you were presenting free will and I was presenting the argument against it was that you slot very naturally into the free will side. So for you, when we switched, you were trying to then argue something you actually don't believe. The difference for me is that while I 100% agree with the logical argument that free will doesn't exist, like I think me and Sam Harris would have no problem agreeing with that at all and building on each other. I also believe in free will existing, but where it moves up into the realm of the mysterious and things being beyond us. So this is so that's a conversation I can have from either direction. And if I'm looking to understand someone else, I will sort of naturally just fall into the opposite of what they're saying because I have both totalities within me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I should qualify that I actually do believe in determinism. I just don't believe that it's incompatible with the concept of free will. So
Yeah,
you're right.
yeah, because it wasn't that you were arguing we have 100% free will in any way. Like, obviously, there's a certain amount that is determined, but that what you were presenting to me, it seemed, was that, and you weren't even being specific about how much free will we have, just that you believe it's fundamental that there is an element of free will, which even
Yeah.
if only 1% is relevant. You know, even if we're 90% determined and have this 1% free will, that still makes it worth paying attention to.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Am I coming through clearly on my video screen, by the way, or am I blurry at all?
Uh, you look okay.
Okay. Just making sure because the internet here isn't the best. So I just wanted to make sure. But yeah, basically, to me, it seems like the whole idea of free will and determinism, it reminds me of it reminds me of a problem that would seem ridiculous looking back on it 200 years from now. Like, for example, let's think of an idea that seems silly that humans had like 200 years ago. And if you thought about, like, can you think of something right now? I can't think of something on the top of my head.
Well, my first thought when you said that, though, was that the argument over free will and determinism goes all the way back to the beginning. So to say that it might be silly 200 years from now, we're already thousands of years into it.
Yeah, it's
And
gone. It's definitely gone back for thousands of years. There's no doubt about that. But to just take the idea further, let's just say instead of 200 years, let's say 2,000 years from now, because I think that eventually we're going to come to some sort of conclusion that the debate was silly, that we didn't have all the pieces in place to truly understand what was going on. So the best that we could do is come up with free will and determinism. And that's kind of what Sam Harris thinks about religion, honestly. He thinks like the only reason religion existed is because we didn't have the tools in place to understand human science otherwise. So we had this attempt to make sense of things through a religious mythos. So you could think of the free will and determinism debate like that, because right now the free will and determinism, they seem to negate one another. Like if you have one, you can't have the other. but my instinct tells me that eventually we're going to reach this paralogical viewpoint where it's somehow both and that's kind of where I tend to believe. And it seems like you also tend to believe that, but maybe in a different way of articulating it than me.
Yeah. And so if rather than saying in 200 years or even 2000 years, will we, which we being our descendants, the biological continuation of we, will we look back on this and see it that way? I'm not sure that we'll ever reach that level, because the free will argument ties into so much of what is consciousness, and it connects you to that metaphysical realm that Peterson isn't comfortable discussing too much. So I do think eventually we will look back on this with that kind of perspective, but I don't mean the biological we thousands of years down the road. I mean the we, perhaps as consciousness or souls, are eventually going to look back on this.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with both perspectives.
Perhaps even the ideas of determinism and free will only make sense if you are within a limited human consciousness.
Sorry, Merc, 1 second. Just keep talking for a second. I'm just talking to someone.
I lost my train of thought, so I will just wait.
Sorry about that. I'm here.
No problem.
No, I think you're right. I think that we will look back on it eventually and think, whether it be as souls or as a future human race, which I'm suspicious that it would probably be both, and see the folly of the debate. But one of the things that I find useful in the way Peterson thinks is he talks about how you act out your beliefs.
Yes.
So we act as if we have free will. So we clearly believe we have free will, regardless of what we're willing to say scientifically.
Here's
I don't know if you're talking, but I can't hear you.
Oh, yes, I am talking.
Or maybe it's on my end. Hold on a second.
I don't seem to have a mute button. When we do the calls like this, I don't have any
I wonder if everyone else can hear you, because I lost you.
I don't know.
Still can't hear you, Merc. Can you hear me? Not if you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Huh. That's really weird. Yeah, for some reason I totally lost your audio. So, they all say that they can hear both of us. So go ahead and say what you were going to say, and I'll try to figure it out on my end, okay?
What, you're going to try to read my lips? Okay, sure. Have fun reading my lips with this. So I guess I'm talking. Also, for whoever's commenting, I can't see the comments when we do the calls this way. So what was? Oh, okay. So while I could take the end of arguing for free will existing, and it's not that I disagree with Peterson when he says, when Peterson wants to argue for free will, it's not that I don't think there's an argument there, but that's where I think Peterson's arguments are weak compared to his arguments on other things. Can
you go back to totally now I can hear you. Can you go back to the beginning of that? So just recap that one more time for me.
When Peterson's in debates with Sam Harris and free will has come up, it's not that I don't think there's an argument for Peterson to make there, but that's somewhere that I haven't seen any of his natural skills in debate shine through. Peterson's arguments for free will seem very weak to me compared to his arguments for other things. The two things that he'll say, one is he says, well, go ahead and try to treat people like that. You know, like, did you see that part when he says that to Harris? Like, go ahead and try. You try to treat people like they don't have free will and they'll be offended. You just can't do it. And it's like, but that's what the social justice warriors are arguing at Peterson. Like, you could make that same argument for other things. Or like, I just imagine, wouldn't Ben Shapiro say to Peterson in that, like, the truth doesn't care what your emotions are. Mm-hmm. It seems he's dropping to an emotional argument there of saying people don't like it. And then the other thing he says is, well, sure, go ahead and try to build a society around no free will. And he throws that out there. And I'm really shocked that Sam Harris never stepped up at that point and took that challenge on face value. Peterson will state, go ahead and try to act like we don't have free will. But he says it in a tone of voice as if that's the argument ending it. Whereas, no, I think Sam Harris has gone a fair way in outlining different ways that we can treat each other as though we don't have free will that actually work. So,
yeah, but it's important. That, go ahead.
Yeah, but I would have loved to have seen Sam Harris step up when Peterson says, sure, go ahead and try to plan a society built on not free will. And I think Sam Harris has at least the beginning of a good argument for that. But I think there's an excellent discussion to be had there of, if we don't have free will, if we are just acting out the either will of the universe or the will of God, if that's real, then there are practical ways you can live by that.
Yeah, and to me, again, it's really not a question of whether or not we have free will, as much as it is how much free will do we have. But yeah, but it's kind of a non-starter if we're not willing to grant that there is such a thing as free will, right? Because then we're just arguing from two different universes, and we don't have the evidence to back up the full point on either side. Because one of the things that I was saying last night is determinism just leads to circular reasoning. You did it because you had to do it, and you couldn't have done it any other way. And you can just apply that circular logic to any topic across time. There's no topic you couldn't apply that to. So it's a bulletproof, and it's unfalsifiable as a method of argument. And you could say that everything's determined, and then you can make an argument for why that is. But then ultimately it just leads, it's just the snake eating its own tail. So the problem with free will is you literally can't prove it in a different way. You can't prove that the choices you're making are anything but a causal stream of different historical events. So it's kind of that's why it's been going on for thousands of years, I guess, right? Because it's an impossible quandary. It's like the Rubik's Cube no one can solve.
Yeah, because like, look at the things, and again, I don't know how useful this is to anyone listening, because we're like building off of a solid 2-hour discussion that no one else heard. But notice that as we discussed it, you get pushed into what is consciousness. Like, we would need to have a proper understanding of what consciousness is to understand whether there's free will or not. And I don't think we've made any from the scientific point of view, we've learned lots about consciousness through experience, through like meditations about exploring consciousness, art, and all these things. But the scientific realm has no real grasp of consciousness. And like, when we discussed this last night, it immediately jumps into the metaphysical, because trying to find out how much free will we have involves going back to, did we make decisions before our birth? Are we acting out decisions we made that we're not aware of? In that, you brought up our subconscious, so subpersonalities. If our subconscious drives us, then perhaps the conscious mind is not the one making the choice. But how do we define we? Are we also all those subconscious processes? Are those deciding? But if so, we would have to have a greater understanding of those aspects of ourselves. And then it also becomes, does our soul make decisions ahead of time? So that some of what appears to be determined is in fact the result of our own decision we're not aware of. Like in Matrix, one of the Matrix movies, I think maybe the third one, Neo sits down with the Oracle and says, I don't know what to decide here. And I think the Oracle says something like, oh, honey, you're not here to make decisions. You've already made all these decisions. You're here to find out
why you made them.
You made those decisions.
That's
so
great.
It is possible that all of what the logical mind sees as determinism, it's possible all of that is in fact just us experiencing a decision that we don't remember making.
Right.
But again, it becomes like chasing a robber up the stairs. And Sam Harris does say this, that even if you bring in the soul, the conditions that make it obvious we don't have free will on the physical level, will also apply to the soul.
Yeah.
So you go up to that, and again, because what was the first decision? Like, even if you want to take into account the soul and everything, or even multiple lives and all of that, when the soul was first created, the first decision it made, how could it have had free will? Because if it doesn't know everything, it can't make a fully informed decision, but also it was created with a certain nature.
Yeah.
And it comes down to where I found it's useful, whether it's a myth or not. And I don't want to offend Christians by referring to it as a myth. I don't mean it in a derogatory sense, but the myth of Michael and Lucifer, or the truth that before this level of reality was even made, there was a pure level of reality where conscious entities were created. And we're told the story that Michael chose to remain on the side of God and that Lucifer chose to oppose God. But again, how did Lucifer have any choice? He made that decision because he was too beautiful and too full of pride.
Well, let me just interject here quickly, because we're building off like a two-hour conversation we had last night, and there's a lot to all this. But first, there's the way of thinking that says something happened that made me do this. So this stream of causal events, the billiard ball effect, all led up to me making this decision, and I had no choice but to involuntarily, automatically act. But I think it's important, like you brought up, how do we define I? Like, who is the one making the decisions? Like, just because our conscious prefrontal cortex isn't cognitively aware of the automatic processes that are going on doesn't mean there's not some level of accommodating choice going on. And we have to grant that it's very possible that the sub-personalities that are within us, including potentially if we do have souls, which I tend to think we do, are constantly making certain plans, choices, and responses underneath that aware level of consciousness in our prefrontal cortex. Just because we don't know how it happened, or we can't explain exactly why we did something, doesn't automatically lead to we had no choice. It just means that we weren't consciously aware of all of the factors that led to us making that choice.
But again, I find that, and yeah, like, I do think we should take free will seriously, and I could take the other side of the argument. But I notice that when I take the other side of the argument, I need to involve mystery. I need to involve reality beyond our comprehension. And so from the logical point of view, I don't see the kink in the armor of the predetermined, although, because every single choice that you make, whichever version of you, your conscious mind, your subpersonalities, your soul, it seems to me your choice is simply a balance between your nature and the situation. And that even when you feel like you're deciding, so say we take something as simple as I'm on a diet, there's a cookie on the table in front of me, I'm trying not to eat the cookie, and I'll frame that in my mind like free will, and that willpower, is perhaps where we exercise free will. So it's like I can tell my biological system and my neural pathways that are established are pushing me to want the cookie. However, there's the part of me that has decided to stand against that natural inclination. And it's just a matter of which is stronger or not. But that's a result of my state of being. It is not a result of an actual choice. So if I don't have enough willpower, which I didn't choose not to have willpower, I also didn't choose to crave cookies to begin with. But if the craving is stronger than my willpower, I can't help but eat the cookie. On the other hand, if my willpower is stronger than the craving and my experiences have demonstrated repeatedly why it always pays off worse to eat the cookie than just the pure knowledge of what this instantaneous pleasure leads me with no choice but to refuse it. because
Right.
the bad outweighs the good. And it seems it's just like when I observe
Well, a lot of people still make the choice to eat the cookie even when they damn well know that that cookie's bad for them. So choice still seems to play a hand in all that.
But if the reason they reach for the cookie, or say we took like a borderline situation where someone almost didn't, but did reach for the cookie. Yeah. If we went back in time and gave them just a little more willpower, you know, like magically sprinkled a little more willpower.
But you can't, but Merc, it's not that they didn't have willpower. It's that they were just using that willpower to eat a cookie.
Okay, then whatever it is that drove them to make the decision to use their willpower towards eating the cookie, they couldn't help but make that decision.
Yeah. That's what,
and again, it's just because of our internal nature. Like anytime we're making a decision, it's, I have reasons A, B, and C to do it. I have reasons D, E, F not to. And it's like we set those on a scale, and it's like, okay, I have more reasons to do it than not.
But we don't know that for sure. We don't know if that's the final conclusion on how we make all our choices. And I do think that it matters, for example, whether we're talking about whether I'm going to have a hash brown or whether I'm going to have a fried egg for breakfast, or if we're talking about the way that I'm approaching my romantic relationship, or the way that the career path that I'm choosing. I mean, you can take the microcosmic examples, which seem to be more deterministic. Like, did I take a left or a right turn at the stop sign? Or you could take the more significant life choices and analyze it from that level. So I think if you the more meta that you take the analyzed the process of analysis, I think the more that free will seems to be likely. But then the reductionist argument would be, no, all those little micro choices lead up to that macro picture. But that's what reductionism is. It attempts to reduce the whole organism to the little parts within the organism, instead of seeing it as this autonomous being that makes up this bigger self. And in Gestalt therapy, we say the totality of the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So as a human being, I have all these parts. Like, I have subpersonalities, I have organs, I have fibers and tissues and bones and all these different things that make up who I am. And if you just say that all those parts are if you add them all up together, that's just me, that seems to be more of a reductionist argument, rather than saying somehow the totality of who I am is something greater than the little parts inside of me that you added up. And that's where you start getting into more of either spiritual, metaphysical, or philosophical landscape where you can't necessarily scientifically prove it. And that's why determinism is on such firm footing. And that's why people can argue it so well. Like last night, you argued determinism for 2 hours so well, and it was extremely convincing. Yeah, but the thing is that, like, it's ultimately reductionistic, and it doesn't leave room for the mystery, like you said.
Well, no, first of all, we could step out more to the macro as well. But what I noticed last night was if I tried to step macro, you would move back to micro. And then when I jump into micro, you would step back to macro. But last night also, I just want to say, even though I kept saying to you, I do have the whole argument for free will to balance this, even though I would say that occasionally, because you just pressed me so hard. It was like by the end, you had filtered out I kept saying that. I was giving you the impression
that I
was sure there was no free will.
No, but
step out to the macro, the examples you gave me, your romantic relationship, doing this channel. And for me, a lot of this comes from trying to find the moment of choice in myself, observing myself. I can't find with my logical mind that choice. And so when you say, when it comes to our relationships, when it comes to our careers, as far as my relationship, I look back on it, I had no choice.
Yeah.
When I met my wife, I couldn't help but fall in love with her.
Right. But I'm not saying that we don't have these deep impulses and drives that aren't voluntary. All I'm saying is there seems to be an accommodating factor in which we are synthesizing the information that is not voluntary and making something creatively conscious out of it, I think. But actually, I have to go, Merc, because my girlfriend is waiting for me to go out, and she's a little sooner than I expected. Do you want to stay on? Or do you want to just end it for now? And I know that this is cutting a really important conversation short, but I do have to go spend some time with her.
Yeah, well, I don't know if us broadcasting this was any good to anyone, because it was building off hours. And you're right.
It was just for fun.
But I don't know. Are there any people online watching?
Yeah, people have been commenting, but I'm not keeping up with it very well today. So
okay, just ask them if they want me to come online for a few minutes. What we'll do is end this call, and I'll just come back on if people want to, and they can ask their questions fresh. I can't see any of the comments. If you go off,
I mean, you can just stay on this if you want, but I think it's Andrew says just keep going.
I won't see any comments though if I keep going.
Oh, then yeah, go ahead and I'll end this stream, and if you want to hop back on and keep streaming, go for it. And if you don't feel like it, then that's fine too.
So did anyone comment that they want me to come back on?
Couple people, Andrew, Boy Meets Wirt, and B Daddy Raps. So
all right, I'm going okay, what I'm going to do is check with my wife and see if I'm allowed to have another play date and come online, because she's coming over at some point. So I'm just going to double check with my wife that I have time, and I will either pop on in under 5 minutes, or my wife said I have to do chores instead.
All right, see you, dude. Thanks, everybody.
All right,